The Remedies question from July of 1995 is another one of those killer questions that slaughtered many bar applicants on that exam. And there's a good reason for it. This is a very difficult question if you don't know the law. If you do know the law, this question is a cakewalk and an easy question. I include it because there's no better way to review with all of you some important legal details that can be enormously useful, not merely on a remedies exam, but also on fact patterns from other subjects as well, notably wills and trusts. So let's have a look at the call of the question. It asks, what remedies, if any, does Cars have? 1, against Brown, discuss. 2, against Jones, discuss. So we kick back and we think, well, in order to have a remedy, there's got to be a theory of liability. So our mind rehearses the checklist of torts and contracts and property, and we're sensitive for all of those issues. With regard to remedies, we know that the big picture of remedies includes damages, restitution, and injunctive relief. So we scribble all of that down on our scratch outline, and then we go to the top of this short fact pattern. Again, reinforcing my basic assumption, which is the shorter the fact pattern, the more difficult the problem, because we've got to find a home for every last detail, and we've got to be especially meticulous about issue spotting. Let's have a look from the top of the question. A woman who identified herself as Smith. Well, wait a second. There's no Smith in the call of the question. Smith brought an automobile into Carson's auto repair shop, Cars, for repairs. Cars completed the repairs for $5,000, which is a fair price for the work done and the parts and materials supplied. The day after the work was completed, police informed Cars that the auto had been stolen by Smith and that Brown was the true owner. Brown is the first person mentioned in the call of the question. Police took possession of the auto and returned it to Brown. Cars has not been paid and Smith has disappeared. Well, let's just stop right there for a moment. What did Brown have to do with this transaction? Nothing. He was a victim, except a victim with a kind of twist. He had his car stolen, but then the police returned it to him. But they didn't merely return it to him, but they returned it to him in a repaired condition. So we look at Brown, and it looks as if Brown has obtained a windfall. And it also looks as if, unless something else happens in this fact pattern, Cars is not going to have any remedies against Brown, because Brown never had a contract with Cars, and Brown never committed a tort against Cars. But read on. There's still another whole paragraph to go. In paragraph 2, we find out that Brown did not have insurance on the car. A week after he got his car returned, Brown sold it and transferred title to Jones for $8,000, the fair market value of the car in its repaired condition. Okay, now let's have a look at the relationship between Brown and Cars. Certainly, Cars does not have a damages theory against Brown because Brown never committed a tort and never breached a contract. But now look, he has just been unjustly enriched, and that unjust enrichment may allow Cars to pursue a restitutionary theory of liability. And as a matter of fact, I conclude that the repair place does have such a theory. But now let's go to the twilight zone part of this fact pattern and the part that makes this question so important. Here we get into what happens to the money. Brown deposits the $8,000 in his bank account, bringing the balance in the account to $22,000. A week after making the deposit, Brown withdraws $20,000 and he blows all of it gambling. That lowers the balance to $2,000. That's the lowest intermediate balance, and that figure is relevant because it gives rise to the issue of constructive trust versus equitable lien. And that's the aspect of this fact pattern that makes it really crucially important for you to review. This fact pattern allows us to look at the dicey issues of a constructive trust and an equitable lien in a very nice and complete context. They can't make it any more straightforward than this. And the reason this is such a hard fact pattern is they blindsided a lot of candidates with this. And if these tough issues come up on your bar exam, you're not going to be confused at all, because if you know the law, you can handle this fact pattern with plenty of time to spare. Okay, when we left off, Brown had just lost a bunch of money gambling. The next day, he wins $1,000 in the lotto, and he deposits that amount into the bank account. So at the end of the day, he's got $3,000 in the bank, and Cars still has not been paid. Then we get the call of the question, and we are also asked about Jones. The only thing we know about Jones is that he paid full value without notice. And that is the classic definition of a bona fide purchaser for value. So the quick bottom line is Cars may pursue remedies against Brown, but they are not going to go anywhere against Jones. And so the second part of this answer is going to be very easy. It's the first part that we really have to work carefully on. Turn the page and take a look at my outline of issues. You'll see that I organize this answer around the remedies, not around the theories of liability. And the reason is there are no theories of liability. There is a restitutionary remedy, and we can claim unjust enrichment. So basically, quasi-contract is the theory of liability, and you could lead with that if you wanted to. I chose to organize my answer around the remedies because that's directly responsive to the call of the question, and because we don't have the typical facts that would give rise to some extended consideration of one or more theories of liability. So, as we look at damages, I indicate the reasons why Brown really didn't cause Cars to suffer damages. I focus on restitution. That's where the action is in this part of the question, and I talk about the constructive trust and equitable lien. I'll comment a little bit more on that when we look at the answer. Next, trying to come up with as many remedies as I can, I bring up replevin. Clearly, replevin, or claim and delivery as it's called in California, wouldn't be very much good to Cars. It's not as if they can come and ask for the parts out of the car, but I do bring it to mind. Similarly, I also touch on injunctive relief. But clearly, this is a question about restitution, and we're distinguishing the other remedies from restitution. I reach a conclusion: Cars can pursue Brown. Next, we consider Cars versus Jones. It's clear that Jones is a BFP for value, and it's not going to take very long for the plaintiff to lose that cause of action. And you don't have to be a defense lawyer like me to see that that's the obvious result. Okay, now let's have a brief look at the answer. It's a pretty short answer to a short question, and I want to turn your attention to some of the salient points. Up front, as usual, I lead with the facts. I indicate who the plaintiff is and why the plaintiff is angry. And I indicate that the plaintiff is seeking remedies. I focus on damages, and here I make the points that I've already made in this short presentation a couple of times. There's no contract between these parties, there was no tort committed by the defendant, and therefore there is no damages liability on the part of Brown to Cars. Next, we turn to restitution. Here, the analysis is much more significant, and this is where you're going to pass or fail this fact pattern. Notice, under restitution, up front, I indicate exactly what the factual context is, and I tie the remedy in up front. I indicate that restitution can allow Cars to recover the $5,000 if Smith still has it, or the value of those repairs if the value is greater than $5,000. We look at the distinction between a constructive trust and an equitable lien. The key idea here is for a constructive trust to be available, there has to be an identifiable corpus. And so, as a result of the shenanigans that our defendant has experienced in gambling, the constructive trust can be imposed only over the lowest intermediate balance, here $2,000. An equitable lien can be established for the remaining value that the plaintiff is seeking compensation for from this defendant. Remember, the key distinction between damages and restitution and how we think about it is this. With damages, we seek to make the plaintiff whole. With restitution, our focus is not on the plaintiff, but instead is on the defendant, and our goal is to prevent the unjust enrichment of that defendant. So, that's the bottom line in my analysis. And you can see that I talk about the constructive trust. the lowest intermediate balance, and the replenishment, and then I move on to equitable lien. I spend a little bit of time on replevin or claim and delivery and a couple of sentences on injunctive relief. But the bottom line is Cars is entitled to restitution from Brown. Next we turn to Cars versus Jones, and you can see, although I did manage to organize a couple of paragraphs with a couple of separate headings, the real content of this analysis is very brief. Jones got title to the car for a fair market value purchase. He didn't have any notice of or any knowledge about the prior problems that Cars has experienced. As a result, Jones' status as a BFP for value cuts off Cars' rights, and Cars will be limited to pursue remedies against Brown or against Smith if Smith ever is tracked down.